Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you heartfelt tales that inspire and move you. Today, we share a story of extraordinary bravery and love. What happens when two young boys find themselves driving through a raging storm to save their mother's life? This journey of courage, resilience, and second chances will leave you on the edge of your seat and remind you of the incredible power of family. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories as we dive into today's unforgettable story. Let's begin. The storm rolled in earlier than anyone expected that day in Springfield, Illinois. Dark clouds gathered swiftly, blotting out the gentle morning sun that had bathed the suburban neighborhood in warmth just hours before. The Walkers' modest home, nestled among a row of neatly trimmed lawns and towering maple trees, buzzed with its usual weekday rhythm. Inside, the faint hum of cartoons played on the television, mingling with the sizzle of bacon in the kitchen. Jessica Walker, a devoted mother of 7-year-old twins, Caleb and Cameron, moved efficiently between flipping pancakes and refilling their orange juice glasses. The twins, as identical as two peas in a pod yet strikingly different in personality, sat at the kitchen table. Caleb, the more daring of the two, was enthusiastically smothering his pancakes with an unnecessary amount of syrup. Cameron, quieter and more cautious, watched with a disapproving frown. "Mom, Caleb's going to use up all the syrup again," he protested, clutching his fork like it was his last line of defense. Jessica, ever patient, turned from the stove with a small, knowing smile. Her dark curls framed her warm brown eyes, and her voice carried the soft authority of a parent who had seen her share of childhood squabbles. "Boys," she said gently, placing another plate of pancakes on the table. "There's plenty to go around. And Caleb, let Cameron have his share." "Okay." "Yes, Mom," Caleb replied, though he sneaked one last drizzle before sliding the bottle across the table. Cameron huffed but quickly turned his focus to his plate. Peace was restored, if only temporarily. In the garage, Michael Walker, their father, was in his element. The faint metallic clink of tools echoed as he worked on the family's old sedan. The garage smelled of motor oil and worn leather, a comforting scent for a man who had spent most of his life fixing cars. Michael loved his work at Walker's auto shop, but his true joy came from sharing his passion with his boys. "Dad, can we help?" Caleb's voice rang out as he appeared in the doorway, with Cameron hesitating a few steps behind. Michael looked up, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag. "Sure. Come here," he said, his grin infectious. "But remember, this is serious business. No messing around." The boys nodded solemnly as if they were being let in on a sacred ritual. Michael opened the car door and lifted Caleb onto his lap. He patiently explained how the gear shift worked, how to turn the ignition, and the importance of keeping the car in park unless you were ready to drive. Caleb listened with wide eyes, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if he were about to win a Formula One race. "Can I try?" Cameron asked quietly. Michael smiled and lifted him into the seat next. "Of course. But remember, this is only for fun. Never, ever drive a car without an adult. Got it?" Both boys nodded emphatically, the seriousness of their father's words sinking in. Jessica, who had stepped into the garage to call them back for breakfast, shook her head with a mixture of amusement and mild exasperation. "Michael, are you teaching them to drive already?" Michael shrugged, laughing. "It's better they learn now. Jess, you never know when it might come in handy." Neither of them could have imagined how true those words would prove to be. Later that day, the weather took a sudden and violent turn. The thunderstorm arrived with an intensity that left the neighborhood eerily quiet, as if everyone had retreated indoors to wait it out. Jessica sat on the couch with a book, but her eyes kept drifting to the darkening sky outside. Caleb and Cameron were sprawled on the floor with their toys, their voices rising and falling as they argued over who got to be the hero in their game. A flash of lightning lit up the room, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. The lights flickered once, then twice, before plunging the house into darkness. "Mom," both boys called out in unison, their voices tinged with fear. "I'm right here," Jessica said calmly, though a small cough escaped her as she stood. "Let's find some flashlights." The boys huddled close as she rummaged through a drawer, her cough becoming more persistent. Cameron tugged at her sleeve. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice small. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she reassured him, though her face betrayed a flicker of discomfort. The storm outside only grew worse. Wind howled through the trees, and rain battered the windows. The house, usually a safe haven, felt fragile under nature's assault. Jessica's cough deepened, a harsh, rattling sound that made Caleb pause mid-drawing. "Mom!" Caleb called out, concern lacing his voice. There was no response. A moment later, the sound of something heavy hitting the kitchen floor sent both boys scrambling to their feet. Jessica lay crumpled on the tile, one hand clutching her chest, the other reaching out as if for help. Her breathing was shallow, each gasp more desperate than the last. "Mom!" Cameron cried, tears streaming down his face. Caleb's heart pounded as he knelt beside her. He shook her gently, then more urgently when she didn't respond. "Mom! Wake up, please." He grabbed the phone, dialing 911 as they'd been taught in school. But the storm had knocked out the lines. He tried her cell phone next. No signal. Panic gripped him. "Cameron, stay with Mom," Caleb ordered, his voice shaking as he ran out into the rain, pounding on neighbors' doors for help. But no one answered. The storm had driven everyone indoors, leaving the world eerily silent except for the rain's relentless drumming. By the time Caleb returned, soaked and defeated, Jessica's breathing had worsened. He looked at Cameron, who was holding their mother's hand, tears mixing with rainwater on his face. "We have to do something," Caleb said, his voice steadier than he felt. He glanced toward the garage. His father's words echoed in his mind, "You never know when it might come in handy." "We're driving her to the hospital," Caleb announced, determination hardening his features. "But Dad said we're never supposed to drive without an adult," Cameron whispered, his voice trembling. Caleb knelt beside him, gripping his brother's shoulders. "Mom needs us. Are you with me?" After a moment's hesitation, Cameron nodded. Together, they set about the impossible task of saving their mother's life. The garage door groaned loudly as Caleb pushed it open, the sound barely audible over the pounding rain. The old sedan sat in the dim light, its dark blue paint reflecting the occasional flash of lightning. It loomed large and intimidating, a daunting obstacle to the two boys who were about to attempt the impossible. Cameron hesitated at the edge of the garage, his small frame trembling from a mix of fear and cold. "Caleb, are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Caleb didn't answer right away. His mind was racing with everything their father had ever taught them about the car. He knew how to start it, how to shift gears, and how to steer. But knowing and doing were two very different things. Still, he couldn't let the fear show. Cameron was counting on him. And more importantly, their mom was counting on both of them. "We don't have a choice," Caleb finally said, his voice firmer than he felt. He opened the driver's side door and climbed into the seat, his small body dwarfed by the interior of the vehicle. He leaned over to unlock the passenger door, motioning for Cameron to join him. "Help me get Mom in first," Caleb said. The two boys returned to the kitchen, where Jessica lay unconscious on the blanket they'd managed to pull beneath her. It was a Herculean effort for the young twins to move her. But they didn't stop. Driven by love and desperation, with trembling hands and tear-streaked faces, they carefully maneuvered her into the back seat, laying her across the cushions. Caleb adjusted her legs, ensuring she was as comfortable as possible. Before closing the door, his hands lingered on the handle for a moment as a wave of doubt washed over him. "What if I mess up? What if we don't make it, he thought. But he quickly shook the thoughts away. There was no room for fear now. He climbed back into the driver's seat. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, Cameron slid into the passenger seat, curling up with his arms wrapped around his knees. The rain hammered against the windshield as Caleb reached for the keys, which still hung from the hook by the garage door. His hands shook as he inserted the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, startling both boys. Cameron jumped slightly, gripping the edge of his seat. "Do you remember what Dad said?" he asked, his voice trembling. Caleb nodded, his knuckles white as he held the wheel. "Break down. Shift to reverse," he muttered to himself. Slowly, the car began to move. It jerked backward suddenly, causing Cameron to yelp. But Caleb quickly corrected. The driveway felt endless as the rain continued to pour, blurring the view through the windshield. With a deep breath, Caleb guided the car onto the street. The tires splashed through puddles, and the headlights barely cut through the downpour. He glanced at his brother, then at their mother in the rearview mirror. "We're going to make it," he said, trying to convince both Cameron and himself. The sedan crept forward, unsteady but determined. Every turn of the wheel felt monumental, every bump in the road a potential disaster. The usual route to the hospital, one they'd driven dozens of times with their parents, now seemed foreign and endless. "Is Mom okay?" Cameron asked, his voice small. Caleb's eyes flicked to the mirror, where Jessica's pale face and shallow breathing filled his view. "She's going to be fine," he replied, his voice breaking slightly. "She has to be." The storm showed no signs of letting up, and every second felt like a race against time. But Caleb's hands stayed firm on the wheel, and Cameron's quiet presence beside him offered just enough strength to keep going. The wipers struggled against the relentless rain, their rhythmic squeak adding to the tension in the car. Caleb squinted at the road, trying to make out the familiar landmarks through the blurry windshield. His small hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his arms aching from the effort of keeping the car steady. Beside him, Cameron clung to the dashboard, his wide eyes darting between the road and their mother in the back seat. "Do you think we're close?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. "I think so," Caleb replied. Though he wasn't sure, the roads looked different in the storm, each intersection and street blending into a maze of shadows and reflections. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of every lesson he'd taught them about the car. "Just focus," Caleb muttered to himself. "Stay calm." As the car swerved slightly to avoid a large puddle, the sudden glare of red and blue lights lit up the interior. The sound of a police siren pierced the storm, and Caleb's heart sank. "Oh no," Cameron whispered, shrinking down in his seat. "It's the police." The boys exchanged a panicked glance, the weight of what they'd done suddenly hitting them. Would they get in trouble? Would the police take their mom away? Caleb's stomach churned as he pulled the car to the side of the road, the tires skidding slightly against the wet curb. The police cruiser came to a stop behind them, its lights casting an eerie glow through the rain. A tall figure emerged, a flashlight cutting through the darkness as the officer approached the driver's side. Caleb's hands trembled on the wheel as he rolled down the window. "Driver. Hands where I can see them," the officer barked, his tone firm but not unkind. Caleb raised his hands slowly, his small fingers barely clearing the edge of the steering wheel. The flashlight beam swept across Caleb's face, then Cameron's, before landing on Jessica in the back seat. The officer froze, his stern expression softening as he realized the situation. "Wait a second," he muttered, lowering his flashlight. "How old are you kids?" Caleb's voice wavered as he answered. 7. "We're 7. Our mom. She needs help." The officer, whose badge read Officer Brady, crouched slightly to get a better look at the scene inside the car. His sharp eyes took in the tear-streaked faces of the twins, the pale figure of Jessica in the back, and the sheer desperation in Caleb's expression. "All right," Brady said, his tone gentler now. You boys did the right thing getting her this far. But I'm going to take it from here. We'll get her to the hospital. I promise. Brady opened the driver's door, motioning for Caleb to switch seats. The boy hesitated, his hands still gripping the wheel as if letting go would mean giving up. I'll take care of her, Brady reassured him, placing a firm hand on Caleb's shoulder. You've been brave enough for one night. Caleb nodded reluctantly, sliding over to the passenger seat. Cameron immediately wrapped his arms around his brother, the comfort of their shared fear bringing them a moment of solace. Brady climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors and taking a deep breath. He glanced back at Jessica, then at the boys. Hold on tight, he said. We're getting her there. The cruiser's sirens roared to life, cutting through the storm as Brady guided the car back onto the road. Caleb and Cameron huddled together, their eyes fixed on their mother as the hospital's glowing lights finally appeared in the distance. The hospital's red and white emergency lights shone like beacons through the storm, growing brighter with every second as Officer Brady navigated the rain-slicked streets. Caleb and Cameron clung to each other in the back seat, their small bodies trembling with cold and exhaustion. The comforting warmth of their earlier determination had been replaced by the raw fear of what might happen to their mother. Is she going to be okay? Cameron's voice cracked as he glanced toward Jessica, whose shallow breaths were barely audible over the storm and the car's rumbling engine. Brady met the boy's wide, pleading eyes in the rearview mirror. She's going to be fine, he said firmly, though the weight of his own doubt pressed heavily on him. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, silently willing the hospital to come into view faster. The storm showed no mercy. Brady's knuckles whitened as he carefully maneuvered the car around a stalled vehicle, its hazard lights flashing weakly in the rain. His years of experience helped him stay calm, but the sight of Jessica's pale face in the mirror brought memories rushing back, memories of his own daughter, Emily, her small hand in his, her gasping breaths as he begged traffic to move faster, the crushing realization that time had slipped away. Brady shook his head sharply, forcing the thoughts aside. Not this time. Not tonight. Stay with me, boys, he said, his voice steady but gentle. You've done more than anyone could ask. I'll get you and your mom to safety. I promise. Cameron wiped his tears with the back of his hand, his lip trembling as he nodded. Caleb's eyes stayed glued to the rearview mirror, silently willing his mother to open her eyes. You have to fight. Mom, he whispered, barely audible over the pounding rain. Finally, the hospital loomed ahead, its glowing sign reading Memorial General Hospital. Brady pressed the accelerator, his eyes scanning for the best entry point. The emergency entrance came into view, and he pulled up sharply, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. Brady jumped out of the car and shouted toward the emergency room doors. I need help here. Unconscious female in the back seat. The automatic doors whooshed open, and a team of paramedics rushed out, their scrubs already dampening in the rain. Caleb and Cameron scrambled out of the car, following closely as the paramedics carefully lifted their mother onto a gurney. Caleb grabbed her hand as they wheeled her inside, but a nurse gently pulled him back. You need to stay here, sweetheart, she said softly, draping a blanket around his shoulders. No, Caleb cried, his voice breaking. I have to stay with her. Brady crouched beside him, his hands resting firmly on the boy's shoulders. Listen to me, Caleb. You've done everything you could to help her. Now it's their turn. Let them take care of her. Tears spilled down Caleb's cheeks as he nodded reluctantly. He allowed the nurse to lead him and Cameron to a bench just inside the emergency room. The twins sat huddled together, their blankets wrapped tightly around them as they stared at the doors their mother had disappeared through. Brady stood nearby, his damp uniform clinging to him as he watched the boys. His jaw tightened as he turned to a nurse. Keep me updated on her condition, he said, his voice low but resolute. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the hospital, a quieter storm brewed. For Caleb and Cameron, Every passing second felt like an eternity. And for Officer Brady, the weight of their trust in him was a responsibility he refused to let slip away. Inside the brightly lit waiting area of Memorial General Hospital, Caleb and Cameron sat side by side on a cold bench, their small hands clutching their blankets. The storm outside howled, but it was nothing compared to the tempest brewing in their young hearts. Their eyes never left the emergency room doors, as if their sheer focus could will their mother back to them. Officer Brady paced nearby, his soaked uniform a testament to the chaotic journey that had brought them here. Every now and then, he glanced at the boys, his chest tightening at their expressions of raw fear and exhaustion. He knew all too well the helplessness they were feeling. A nurse approached cautiously, her clipboard pressed against her chest. "Officer Brady," she asked, her voice soft but professional. "The doctors are doing everything they can. Her vitals are stabilizing, but it'll take time to determine the extent of her condition." Brady nodded, his jaw tightening. "Thank you. Keep me informed." As the nurse walked away, Caleb suddenly looked up at Brady. "Do you think she'll wake up?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Brady crouched down to their level, meeting Caleb's gaze with steady determination. "She's fighting. Caleb. Your mom is strong. And because of what you and your brother did, she has a real chance. Don't forget that." Cameron, who had been quiet, spoke up in a trembling voice. "But what if she doesn't?" Tears spilled from his eyes as he clung to Caleb's arm. Brady's heart ached for them. He hesitated, not wanting to give false hope but also refusing to let their spirits crumble. "Then we'll face it together," he said gently. "But right now, I need you two to keep being strong for her. Can you do that?" The boys nodded slowly, their fear momentarily tempered by his calm reassurance. As the minutes dragged on, the waiting area felt heavier with uncertainty. Brady's police instincts began to kick in. Something about Jessica's sudden collapse gnawed at him, a detail he couldn't shake. He pulled out his phone and stepped away from the boys to make a call. "Dispatch," he said quietly, glancing back to ensure the boys couldn't hear. "I need information on Michael Walker, the husband of the woman admitted here tonight. Check his last known whereabouts and activity." The response crackled through the line. Last activity was at Walker's auto shop earlier today. No recent phone usage or credit card transactions. "Want us to issue a bolo?" Brady hesitated, his gaze drifting back to Caleb and Cameron. "No," he said finally. "Not yet. I'll find him myself." When he returned to the bench, Caleb was gripping a toy car they had brought from home. Its chipped paint and worn wheels hinted at countless hours of play, a small reminder of happier times. Brady sat beside them, offering a small but genuine smile. "Tell me about your dad," he said gently. Caleb looked up, his lip quivering. "Dad's smart. He knows everything about cars. He even taught us how to start one, but only for emergencies," he added quickly, as if confessing a secret. Cameron chimed in, his voice soft. "He loves Mom. He'd never hurt her." Brady nodded, his mind working through their words. Whatever the truth was, he owed it to these boys to find out. The nurse returned with an update. "Jessica is stable, but we detected traces of solvent fumes in her system. It looks like accidental exposure." Brady's brow furrowed. The solvent, something wasn't adding up. Rising from the bench, he placed a reassuring hand on Caleb's shoulder. "I'll be back soon. I need to check something. Stay with the nurse." "All right." The boys nodded, their eyes filled with a mixture of trust and fear. As Brady stepped into the stormy night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had a promise to keep to Jessica, to Caleb and Cameron, and to himself. Officer Brady drove through the rain-slicked streets, his wipers working furiously to keep the windshield clear. The storm hadn't let up, the relentless downpour matching the urgency he felt. His destination loomed ahead: Walker's auto shop, a modest but well-kept garage where Michael Walker spent most of his days. Brady's headlights illuminated the front of the shop, its windows dark and uninviting. The rain hammered against the car as he stepped out, flashlight in hand. The shop's sign swayed in the gusty wind. Its paint faded but the name still legible. Brady approached the door, testing it with a firm push. Locked. He moved around to the back entrance, where the scent of motor oil and faint chemical fumes hit him as soon as he opened the door. Inside, the garage was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the occasional drip of water and the hum of a faulty fluorescent light. Brady's flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing scattered tools and half-finished projects. A workbench in the corner caught his eye. Beside a disassembled carburetor sat an open bottle of industrial solvent, its pungent odor unmistakable. Brady examined the label closely. It matched the chemical traces found in Jessica's system. Nearby, a ventilation fan hung askew, its blades rusted and unmoving. Damn! Brady muttered under his breath. The broken fan would have allowed fumes to build up unchecked. This wasn't intentional, it was an accident waiting to happen. Brady's radio crackled to life as dispatch called in. Officer Brady. We've located Michael Walker's truck. It's parked outside a diner on 5th and Main. Do you need backup? No backup needed. Brady replied. Already heading for his car. I'll handle it. The drive to the diner was mercifully short. But Brady's mind raced the entire way. If Michael was at the diner, unaware of what had happened, the news would hit him hard. But if he wasn't there by coincidence? Brady didn't let himself finish the thought. The small, neon-lit diner came into view, its parking lot nearly empty. Michael's truck was unmistakable, its worn paint and familiar dents standing out in the sparse lot. Brady pulled up beside it, his flashlight cutting through the rain as he approached. Inside the truck, slumped in the driver's seat, was Michael. His grease-streaked clothes suggested he'd come straight from the shop. Brady rapped on the window, startling him awake. Michael blinked groggily, his eyes widening as he recognized the officer. Michael Walker, Brady said firmly. I need you to come with me. Your wife's in the hospital, and your boys are there waiting for you. Michael's face drained of color. Jessica. The boys. What happened? He stammered. Fumbling to open the door, Brady placed a steadying hand on Michael's shoulder. We'll talk on the way. Right now. They need you. The drive back to the hospital was tense, with Michael gripping the dashboard tightly. I didn't know. I was working late. And then the storm, his voice cracked as he trailed off. Brady glanced at him. There's a bottle of solvent open in your garage. The ventilation fan wasn't working. That's likely what caused her collapse. Michael's hands shook as he absorbed the information. It's my fault, he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. I should have checked the fan. I should have been home. Brady's voice softened. It was an accident. Michael. Right now. What matters is being there for your family. They need you. As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Michael bolted from the car, sprinting through the rain toward the emergency room. Brady followed, watching as the man's guilt and love propelled him forward. Inside, Caleb and Cameron spotted their father immediately. Dad, they cried. Running toward him, Michael dropped to his knees, pulling them into a tight embrace. You saved her, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. You saved Mom. The boys clung to him, their tears mixing with his as the storm outside began to ease. Inside the warm glow of the hospital room, the Walker family reunited. Jessica lay in the bed, her breathing steadier now, the color slowly returning to her face. Caleb and Cameron refused to leave her side, each holding one of her hands tightly. Michael knelt beside the bed, his forehead resting on their joined hands as tears continued to stream down his cheeks. I'm so sorry, Michael whispered, his voice breaking. I should have been there. I should have checked everything. I almost lost you because of my mistake. Jessica's eyelids fluttered open, her gaze finding Michael's face. Her voice was weak but clear as she spoke. "You're here now," she murmured, squeezing his hand gently. "That's what matters." The boys leaned in closer, their young faces filled with relief and overwhelming emotion. "Mom, we were so scared," Caleb said, his voice trembling. "We didn't know what to do. But you did it," Jessica replied, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You too were so brave." Michael looked at his sons, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and guilt. "You saved her," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't believe you drove all the way here in that storm. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Officer Brady stood near the doorway, quietly observing the family's heartfelt reunion. He felt a pang of emotion he hadn't expected. His own memories of a family he'd lost flashing in his mind. He knew he should step away and give them privacy, but something held him there. A sense of unfinished responsibility. As Michael turned to thank him, Brady raised a hand to stop him. "Don't thank me," Brady said softly. "Thank them. Your boys are the real heroes tonight. They didn't give up, even when things seemed impossible." Michael nodded, his expression one of gratitude and awe. "Thank you for protecting them," he said, his voice earnest. "For getting them here safely." Brady smiled faintly, the weight of the night still heavy on his shoulders. "They were protecting you," he replied. "All of you." A nurse entered the room, her kind face lit with relief. "Jessica is stable and improving," she announced, glancing at the boys. "You can stay with her tonight. She's going to need rest. But the worst is over." Cameron leaned his head against Caleb's shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Caleb reached out to Brady, his small hand gripping the officer's uniform sleeve. "You're not leaving, are you?" he asked, his eyes wide and pleading. Brady crouched down, meeting Caleb's gaze. "I'll be nearby," he assured him. "And I'll check on you tomorrow." "Okay." Caleb nodded. Though he didn't let go immediately, Cameron looked at Brady and whispered, "Thank you." The sincerity in his voice made Brady's throat tighten. Brady stood, giving a final nod to the family before stepping into the hallway. As he leaned against the wall, he let out a deep breath. Tonight had been more than just another call, it was a reminder of the resilience of love and the power of second chances. The storm had eased by morning, leaving the world glistening with dew under the soft light of dawn. Inside the hospital, the Walkers began to feel the weight of the previous night lift, replaced by an overwhelming gratitude that they were together. Jessica's condition continued to improve, her strength returning little by little with every moment of rest. Caleb and Cameron sat beside her bed, still clutching her hands as though afraid to let go. The events of the stormy night had etched an unspoken bond between them and their mother, one built on bravery and love. Michael sat nearby, his eyes red from a sleepless night but filled with determination. "Boys," Michael said softly, his voice steady despite his emotions, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. What you did, it wasn't just brave. It was incredible. You saved your mom's life." Caleb looked up, his small face a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "But we broke the rules," he said hesitantly. "We weren't supposed to drive without an adult." Michael reached out, placing a firm hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You did what you had to do," he said. "Sometimes, doing the right thing means making hard choices. And last night, you made the best choice anyone could have made. You didn't give up. You didn't stop trying." Cameron leaned against his brother, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "We couldn't lose her, Dad. We just couldn't." Michael's heart ached at their words, and he pulled both boys into a tight embrace. "You didn't. Because of you. We're all still here together." In the hallway, Officer Brady stood near the nurse's station, speaking with a staff member about Jessica's progress. His face showed the wear of a long night, but his posture remained firm, his presence radiating a quiet strength. When the doctor approached, Brady stepped aside to let him enter the Walker's room. He lingered near the doorway, not wanting to intrude but also feeling an unexplainable pull to stay close to the family. Jessica's voice, though soft, carried to where Brady stood. "Michael," she said, her tone filled with love and gratitude. "We're going to be okay. We've been given a second chance. And we're going to make the most of it." Michael nodded, his eyes glistening as he held her hand. "I promise you, Jessica. No more late nights at the shop. No more missing what really matters. You, the boys, our family comes first. Always." The twins looked between their parents, their small faces lighting up with hope. Cameron reached into his pocket and pulled out the toy car he'd kept with him all night. "This is for you, Mom," he said shyly, placing it on the bedside table. "It's like a good luck charm." Jessica smiled, her eyes filling with tears as she cupped Cameron's face. "It's perfect," she said. As Brady turned to leave, Caleb's voice called out to him, "Officer Brady." "Wait." Brady turned, his expression softening as Caleb and Cameron ran toward him. Caleb held something in his hand, his own small badge, one he'd earned during a school project. "You should have this," Caleb said, holding it out to Brady, "because you're the one who really saved us." Brady crouched down, taking the badge with reverence. "I think we saved each other," he said gently, his voice thick with emotion. The sun rose higher outside the hospital windows, its warm light filling the room as the Walkers prepared to move forward together, stronger and more united than ever before. As the sun rose on a new day, the Walker family stood together, their bond stronger than ever. The storm had tested their courage, love, and resilience, but they emerged with a renewed appreciation for each other and the power of family. Officer Brady, watching from a distance, carried with him a quiet sense of peace, knowing he had made a difference. If this story of love, bravery, and second chances touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more incredible tales that inspire and move us all. See you in the next video.